Welcome back, everyone. Today we're diving deep, really deep, into some fascinating new evidence about our ancient human relatives.
Yeah, we're talking about the Denisovans.
Exactly, the Denisovans. And you sent in some super intriguing articles about a possible Denisovan connection to Taiwan.
Right, and that's what's so cool about this, It suggests they were spread out way more than we originally thought.
So we're going to try to piece together what this new evidence tells us about the Denisovans and, about us, really. How do people end up living in this part of the world?
And those articles you shared, they're really the jumping off point for this deep dive. The one from Science News, Denisovans inhabited Taiwan, new fossil evidence suggests, and that research paper straight from the source, a male Denisovan mandible from Pleistocene Taiwan, published in Science.
Right. So they lay out the whole discovery and then get into the nitty-gritty of analyzing this jawbone.
It's pretty detailed stuff, but we're going to break it down for you, pull out the most exciting bits, make sure it's clear and, fun to explore.
Exactly. Now, before we get into the specifics of this Taiwanese find, let's back up a bit. For anyone who's not totally up to speed, who exactly were the Denisovans?
Well, honestly, they're a pretty new addition to our understanding of human evolution. We only really learned about them in 2012 when DNA was extracted from fossils in, get this, Denisova cave in Siberia.
So pretty straightforward naming there.
Right. Denisova cave, Denisovans, easy peasy. But what's really fascinating is that they were closely related to Neanderthals.
Okay, so another branch of the human family tree.
Yep. And we now know they interbred with both Neanderthals and, get this, early modern humans.
So our direct ancestors were mingling with the Denisovans.
Yeah, as humans were spreading across Asia. So if you have East Asian ancestry, there's a real chance you're carrying a bit of Denisovan DNA.
That's wild. Makes you feel connected to these ancient humans in a way, right?
For sure. It's like this ancient thread linking us back through time. Now, this new evidence from Taiwan, it's not your typical archaeological discovery.
No, I was reading about that. His jawbone had quite a journey.
It did. Fishermen pulled it up from the ocean floor off the coast of Taiwan. Imagine that, this ancient relic caught in a fishing net.
It's almost poetic, isn't it? Pulled from the depths like that.
And then it somehow ended up in an antique shop.
Really? So this scientifically invaluable fossil could have been sold as some sort of, a curio.
Who knows what could have happened to it? But thankfully, in 2008, someone in Taiwan bought it and realized, hey, this might be something important. They donated it to the National Museum of Natural Science in Taiwan, and that's where researchers got their hands on it.
Thank goodness for people like that.
Right. I mean, who knows what we would have missed out on. So at first they called it Penghu 1. They couldn't immediately tell what it was, classified it as some unknown Homo species.
Unknown Homo species.
Yeah.
Talk about a scientific mystery. So how did they crack the case? What revealed the Denisovan connection?
Well, the big breakthrough came from this incredible technique called ancient protein analysis.
Protein analysis, so not DNA.
Right. See, the jawbone was super old and had been in the ocean, which really messes with DNA preservation. So they looked at the proteins still inside the fossil. They were able to extract, get this, 4,241 protein residues.
That's a mind-boggling amount of detail. So what did these proteins tell them? What was the smoking gun?
2 of these protein fragments had a very specific chemical signature, a structure that is super common in Denisovans but super rare, almost non-existent, in Neanderthals and modern humans. These were proteins called ameloblastin, that's AMBN for short, with a marker labeled M273V, and collagen alpha-2I chain, also known as COL1A2, with a marker R996K.
So basically like a unique protein fingerprint pointing directly to Denisovans. That's incredible. Even without DNA, we can identify these ancient humans.
Exactly. And the fact they were able to do this with a fossil from the ocean, that really shows how far science has come. Plus, they were able to use a protein marker to determine it belonged to a male.
Wow. That's incredible. But it wasn't just these protein markers, right? The shape of the jaw itself also played a role in identifying it.
Right. So beyond those protein fingerprints, the actual shape of the jaw, they call that morphology, was another piece of the puzzle.
Okay, so how did that work?
Well, they compared Penghu 1 to another Denisovan jawbone found high up on the Tibetan plateau. They call that one shadowy 1.
So another piece of the Denisovan puzzle to compare it to. What stood out? What were the matching features?
Both jaws share some really distinctive traits. The jawbone sits low and it's really thick. Plus, the molars are big, and the shapes of their tooth roots are similar too. All these physical echoes between the Taiwanese jaw and the Tibetan one really backed up that protein evidence.
Okay, it's starting to build a really strong case here. But one of the big questions with fossils is always, how old is it? Did they manage to date the Penghu 1 jaw?
Unfortunately, that's been a bit of a challenge. Being exposed to seawater for so long really messed up the collagen, making it hard to directly date the fossil.
So no precise date then?
Not exactly. They've used different techniques to estimate a potential age range.
Okay, so what's the ballpark? When might this Denisovan have lived in Taiwan?
Well, the estimates suggest it could be somewhere between 70,000 and 10,000 years ago, or maybe a bit older, between 190,000 and 130,000 years ago. And here's the thing. Both those periods line up with times when sea levels were lower, meaning Taiwan was connected to mainland Asia by land.
Aha, so that explains how they could have gotten there walking across.
Yeah, exactly. So we have the protein evidence saying Denisovan, these cool physical similarities to the Tibetan jaw, but the exact date is still a bit of a question mark. Makes it even more interesting to figure out where this Taiwanese Denisovan fits into the bigger picture.
Absolutely. So, assuming this was a Denisovan living in Taiwan, what does it tell us about them that we didn't know before? This is where it gets really interesting, right?
Oh, absolutely. This discovery really expands our understanding of their geographic territory. Before, all we really had was the cold Siberian sites and that high altitude find in Tibet.
And now we have Taiwan, thousands of kilometers away.
Yeah, and a totally different environment, much milder, a lot more rain, and that's the big takeaway here. Denisovans weren't just hanging out in the cold. They were adaptable, way more than we thought.
So we're talking about a much wider range of environments they could live in. That changes things a bit.
It totally does. We need to rethink their capabilities. And get this, they also found water buffalo fossils in the same area as Penghu 1. Water buffalo, they like it warm and humid. Another clue that these guys were not afraid of a little climate change.
Wow. So does this open up the possibility that there were different types of Denisovans, maybe with slightly different appearances depending on where they lived?
That's a really interesting question, and researchers are definitely considering that. Yusuke Kaifu, for instance, he's been looking at fossils from different parts of Asia and suggests that maybe, just maybe, Denisovans had some regional variations in their looks. Penghu 1 could be another piece of evidence supporting this idea.
It makes sense. If they were spread out over such a large area with different environments, evolution might have taken them in slightly different directions.
Exactly. But even with all this new evidence, there's still a lot of debate about exactly how to classify Denisovans. Like, were they a distinct species or just a really interesting subspecies?
Right. There's no clear consensus yet, is there?
Not really. For example, there's a paleoanthropologist named Zhu Wu who thinks Penghu 1 and other Denisovan-like fossils from China belong to a whole new species. He calls it Homo juluensis. His argument is partly based on these huge brain cases found in China.
So this isn't just about the Penghu 1 jaw, then?
Right. But here's the thing. Not everyone agrees with him. Sheila Athreya, another paleoanthropologist, thinks it's too early to say for sure. She points out that we just don't have enough Denisovan fossils, and most of the ones we do have are incomplete, so it's hard to say for sure what a typical Denisovan skeleton looked like.
And she also raises the issue of misclassifying other ancient human remains, right?
Yeah, she's saying that some fossils that look Denisovan-ish based on shape alone might actually belong to other ancient humans from Asia, like Homo erectus. It's tricky without DNA or more complete skeletons. We need more pieces of the puzzle to really understand where they fit in the human family tree and what ultimately happened to them.
So even with all these unknowns, are we getting a clearer picture of what Denisovans look like, at least in terms of their jaws and teeth?
We are. The Penghu 1 and Chiahe 1 mandibles, along with those Denisovan molars from Siberia, they're painting a picture.
What's the picture they're painting?
Well, they seem to have had thick but low mandibles, meaning their lower jaw was kind of squat. The front teeth curved in a wide arc, and their teeth were generally large, especially those molars. Their premolar roots were thick and tended to branch out, and the second molar root was longer and thicker than the first molars.
Wow, that's getting pretty specific. Are those dental details unique to Denisovans?
They seem to be pretty distinctive, and some Denisovan molars even had an extra root on the second molar. Plus, there's some evidence that their third molar might have been absent altogether.
Interesting. And you mentioned some fossils from East China that might fit this Denisovan profile, too.
Yeah, there's a site called Hexian, where they found a mandible and some teeth that share a lot of these characteristics. So some researchers think those Hexian remains could be Denisovan, too. But, like with a lot of this stuff, we need more evidence to be sure.
It seems like every new find brings more questions than answers, but in a good way. It keeps things exciting. But you mentioned earlier that these physical features we're seeing in the jawbones and teeth don't quite match up with what they predicted based on DNA methylation patterns from the Siberian Denisovan remains.
That's right. It's an interesting discrepancy. They used that Siberian DNA to try and reconstruct what a Denisovan might have looked like, and their prediction for the mandible was quite different.
How so? What did they predict?
Well, based on the DNA, they thought Denisovans would have had a more protruding jaw, a bigger connection point to the skull, and a wider and taller front part of the mandible compared to modern humans.
So more prominent features overall.
Yeah, but there's a big but here. No one's actually found a Denisovan mandible in Denisova Cave itself. So that DNA reconstruction, it was based on genetic material found with other bones, not a directly linked jawbone.
So we're relying on a bit of guesswork until we find a complete Denisovan skull.
Pretty much. It highlights how important it is to find more complete fossils. We need those actual bones to really understand what they looked like.
Absolutely. Now, you also mentioned something intriguing about the sex of the Denisovan fossils we've analyzed so far.
Oh yeah, that's a bit of a mystery. The ones we've been able to sex, that's Penghu 1, and those big molars from Denisova Cave, they were all male. Makes you wonder, were those robust jaws and big teeth a male trait in Denisovans?
It's like a sexual dimorphism thing. Interesting.
It could be. Maybe female Denisovans had more slender, delicate features. There's a fossil from northeast China, the Jinishan fossil, that some think might be a female Denisovan based on its shape, but we don't have DNA to confirm it.
More mysteries to solve. But it's fascinating to think about, right?
Totally. We need those molecular clues to really crack this case.
So even with all the unknowns, what does Penghu 1 tell us for sure about Denisovans and their place in the world?
It definitely reinforces the idea that during a certain period, we're talking Middle to Late Pleistocene, there were at least two distinct human groups roaming around Eurasia. Neanderthals with their smaller teeth and more graceful jaws, and Denisovans with their larger teeth and those robust, low-sitting mandibles. And Penghu 1 really hammers home the point that these were separate evolutionary paths, different from the lineage that led to us, Homo sapiens.
So we're seeing the diversity of human evolution playing out right in front of us, literally in these jawbones.
Exactly. And those unique Denisovan features, those thick jaws, those big teeth, they're a testament to that.
Absolutely. So let's recap the key takeaways for everyone listening. This Denisovan jawbone from Taiwan, it throws open the doors, shows us they were living in way more places than we thought, adapted to different climates, not just those freezing Siberian landscapes.
And the protein analysis of Penghu 1, that's the real star of the show. It gave us that crucial evidence, confirmed it was Denisov, even without DNA.
Yeah, that's amazing in itself. Plus, we're starting to get a clearer picture of what they look like, though there is still plenty of gaps to fill. But we know about those strong jaws, the big teeth.
And the fact that we're even having this conversation is kind of mind-blowing. This jawbone, imagine it, caught in a fishing net, sold in an antique shop, and it ends up changing our understanding of human evolution. It really emphasizes that discoveries can happen in the most unexpected ways. You never know what's lurking out there, waiting to be found.
You really don't. And that's what makes all this so exciting. So why should our listeners care about all this ancient history, about these long-gone Denisovans?
Because it's part of our story, too. It adds a whole new dimension to human evolution, shows us just how interconnected different parts of the world were even back then. The Denisovans challenge our assumptions, make us realize that our past was even more diverse and complex than we imagined. And who knows, maybe some of us are carrying a little bit of Denisovan in our genes.
Yeah, that's something to think about, isn't it? It makes you feel connected to these ancient people.
Definitely. And this is just the beginning. There are so many more discoveries waiting to be made.
Exactly. We're just scratching the surface. So here's a final thought to leave you with. If the Denisovans were able to adapt to such different environments, from the frigid Siberian steppes to the warm, humid forests of Taiwan, what else might we learn about them? What were their behaviors like? How did they organize their societies? Did they interact with other human groups, maybe even our direct ancestors? What secrets are still hidden, waiting to be unearthed? The story of the Denisovans is far from over, and who knows what fascinating twists and turns await us in the next chapter.